a few more thoughts and insights, random thoughts, and possibly even insights from the studio. And I'm going to address some of the newspeak mantras. The one that really has motivated my gray cells to talk today is the new abnormal. What the heck is that about? It's either normal or it's abnormal, but now we'll have the new abnormal, or is it the new normal? Yeah, this is a brilliant. Other people, I'm sure, have caught on to this. The idea of the new abnormal, which very disturbing, in fact, because uh, uh, I'm gonna here's a preamble. I just like to say something that has always been to some extent troublesome is to provide thoughts and ideas like so many do on YouTube. This is a very convenient vehicle platform to just kind of like what I do. Like a lot of people can just sit in front of a little device and speak into the little thing. And it becomes kind of like when I grew up and my parents, if they read something in the newspaper or saw something on TV, it's got to be true. It's got to be true. I think we're a little more savvy now to some extent, but somewhere there is a kind of mythology around when we're not directly confronted with another person and we absorb their ideas, meaning it's not direct face to face. It has some kind of peculiar validity attached to it. So this has been something in terms of the news media. This has been very profitable for certain people who have understood this and created the mantras, the stories that are I actually think changing people from in a very fundamental way. And it becomes like it's always been considered the fourth department in governance, the idea of the news being an actual contributing element to governance, that we're given stuff, we're given information, and then we're asked to believe it to be true. So we're asked to believe that the new abnormal is functioning now. And don't kid yourselves, it's nothing near normal. It's a new abnormal. And the first thought I had is that with the recent developments and the extreme reactions to the events in Minneapolis or Minnesota, the amount of contact that people are having without being protected. You should have safe sex and you should have safe contact with each other. It's no longer, it's like that AIDS crisis, right? Brought in the idea of condoms and safe sex and that entire mantra. Now it has escalated. So before you could sort of have contact with the proper kind of precautions, now you can only have distant, you can't have contact, you're at a distance always. And with all the people that are interacting and rioting, they should all drop dead at some point. Oh no, you're asymptomatic, you've got it, but you don't get sick and all that. Considering the number of people who are not complying with the directives, this should be a full-blown 1918, 1919 pandemic. This should be on such a high level, this pandemic, based on the fact that I see just as many people, well, I wouldn't say just as many people, not in my town, they're pretty compliant. It's a small town, but I see a lot of people who are not interested in masking and wearing masks, and the entire thing of the new abnormal is not flying with a lot of people. And based on what I'm seeing, people should be dropping like flies. This is so dangerous. People should be dropping like flies. So I've like in my last videos, I've commented, I've talked about this idea, the psychotic part of this is the new abnormal. It's even much worse than abnormal. It's psychotic. I feel this is fundamentally psychotic. Something has gripped the population over a long period of time. We have been inculcated into a way of thinking because we're kind of trapped. This is how I see myself in terms of making art. It applies, the idea of art making is interesting because the best art always counters what happened before. Things in our minds change because it's not because we comply with something, but because we question something, or we feel that there are alternatives to the way of seeing. So I don't know if you just think about how major changes supposedly came. Let's say that in the Renaissance you had a few people who said, well, the Earth is no longer flat; it's now a ball, it's round, and then you think about this because you question what has gone before. Now, I'm not going to get into the flat and the round thing, but I'm just saying that if people had a certain concept, and apparently Galileo was put on the rack for saying that the Earth is a ball and it's not. And I don't think the Vatican was too interested whether it's flat or a ball. They're just interested in making sure that the control stays in the hands of a small group of people. So when the community that call themselves a truth community is enraged, I've always said truth is a moving target. So the important thing from what I glean from all of this is that as long as the seat of influence stays where it is within a certain group or groups, the truth can be whatever you want it to be, whether it's flat or round, whatever. And the idea, though, here is something now that is probably quite troublesome to people, is like, what am I going to do? Let's say, and I was listening again, I mention him often, Matt from Quantum of Conscience. I'm basically on board with the way he thinks, the way he analyzes and goes through the anomalies that are presented to us, that are basically stories that can be dismantled rather easily. There isn't much like the SpaceX thing. It's such a bunch of hooey, again, like people propagated to be of value to us when they've never really accomplished anything. This musty Elon is has been propped up through phony baloney money from even people like Peter Thiel. You can research this. This person has been propagated the same way Trump, who went bankrupt all the time, who's now he's now the pinnacle of success, somebody that has failed numerous times and was bailed out, not recovered on his own accord, but was propagated again, was helped along. I mean, anybody can succeed if you have enough help and people holding you up. It's kind of like you can create a civilization that's magnificent if you have enough slave labor. It's basically, that's how civilization in the past has always worked. You conquer and you get people to work for you for nothing. And this is also very operative now. When you're looking at what is interesting in this is that if you're looking at slavery in the 19th century and before, going all the way back to Muslim times, Muslims were notoriously brutal to their slaves. I mean, this is something most people don't realize. The numbers of deaths associated to Muslim slavery is even greater than what the white honky character did. Now, what's interesting is in the 19th century slavery, I don't know who remarked this, but that the slaves were, this is quite cynical, but I'll just repeat it, the slaves were much better off. Oh no, this is a 20th century comment from somebody like maybe a Steve Jobs character. interviewed in secrecy, and he said, you know, it's like we're so much more advanced in the slavery aspect of our civilization because we just give somebody a wage for 8 hours and then they have to take care of themselves for 16. The 16 other hours they have to take care of themselves. We don't have to think about them. So we've advanced, because before it was a 24/7 maintenance schedule on people. You had to provide housing and food, and to the extent that people were taken care of in a health way. If you were conscientious, a person of conscience who had slaves, you took care of your slaves, I guess, I don't know. But the point is that within this system of civilization as we understand it, this magnificent achievement, the technologies and all, it's all on the it's like literally free labor when you think about it. And unions are there saying, oh no, we're going to get 50 cents more an hour. And it's like, oh, isn't that fantastic? We've done something for the worker. Yes, yes. But ultimately, it's still on the level of, practically speaking, it's a form of slavery. Hourly wages are a form of slavery, especially in the way it's practiced in a capitalist fascist society. Because the amount of profit that a person like the billionaires and that 1% of 1% is managing to extract can only be done through usury. It's the only way. There is no such thing as explaining this away like Trump. Oh, I'm a successful billionaire because I failed all the time. Where am I going? Where am I going? The new abnormal. So what I'm coming to is a thought process I've had before. I've talked about this to some extent before. I'll try to elaborate on the idea. What can I do? What can we do? I mean, we're on this platform, and people are and are not taken seriously. I think the way it's interpreted, that if you have 500,000 subscribers, you're taken seriously and you need to be listened to. This is not, again, it's part of this. If I read it in the paper or see it on TV, it must be true. If 500,000 people or 1 million people subscribe, or you have hundreds of thousands of views, it must be true. It must be right. If I have 10,000 views or 30, you know, when you have 10, you say you want 50,000. When you have 50, you want 100,000. And however this escalates into the levels, into the numbers that justify credibility, to me, it really makes no difference. What ultimately makes the greatest difference is for me to verify something within myself. And this, for the largest part, is missing. You know, in the sense that I understand we're susceptible, we're gullible, sometimes even especially. And to verify things for ourselves becomes an issue. It's not easy. I accept this. I understand this. I read something. I look at something. Even in my own production, when I make a painting, I have to interpret that which I put out to see if it has credibility, whether it's worthwhile to deal with this way of thinking. It's like making a painting is a way of thinking, is a thought process. And even on a more profound level, it's a revelation. It digs deep into parts of myself that I would refer to as a soul, whereas the mind is like quite a superficial level of selfness. When we get into an aspect of ourselves that is actually requiring some really hardcore self-critical analysis, this is where things really are happening, right? So in this area of myself, where I find, I suppose even I'll invoke this idea of truth. There is an element of truth that can be established through this critical part of myself. It's not necessarily even thought. It's just some kind of a reaction that I have. If I place, like, I do a green and a yellow together and see what happens. This isn't necessarily a thought. It has something to do with, I suppose, metaphor. It's like an idea of understanding critically an aspect of myself. It is quite often not possible to pinpoint it. It's more of a sensibility. It's a sensibility that relies on a lot of other things besides thinking. Yeah. So here's the dilemma. What can we do? We are faced with monumental issues in terms of this psychotic, global attitude, response, action. People hunkered down because they're afraid to infect each other. And if this was true, all these protesters would be creating enormous deaths. If this was in fact true, millions of people, the way they've explained this idiotic COVID thing to be highly infectious, people, okay, if you get infected and you don't get sick, it's not a big deal. Then there will always be victims to a circumstance. But if you have one death in 5 million, it makes no sense to create a hysteria around something like that. That's what I'm saying. Now, I'm invoking this quantum of conscience Matt guy. He said, what can we do? Oh, geez, I don't know. What can we do? He keeps bringing out the depravities that are practiced, the reality as we are experiencing right now. And the only thing you can actually do is withdraw, lock down, remove yourself. That's one solution. But we're so dependent on each other. We're so dependent on this division of labor. The way we function is there is virtually no person left on the planet, maybe in the Amazon, in the deepest jungles where people supposedly are still never had contact with anybody. They're living totally independent. I could see that. But white honkies, civilization, or any color skin in civilization, I don't care. We're depending on a process, the division of labor, to actually help us survive. So no matter how much food you store and all that, ultimately there's going to be a dependence, an interdependence. Okay. So having set aside this sort of this fantasy about, oh, I can do it myself. I'll have the guns and I'll have all the ammo and all the supplies and provisions. I can do it. Well, yeah, for a while. But what is a while? A month, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years. Ultimately, that loneliness, that attachment to loneliness and isolation will break down, because we're also very gregariously social beings. We see this in not just among us, but the animal kingdom. And so my thoughts today on this new abnormal is, what is the counter? What is the counter to this? And I refer to this process, this inner process, quite often, where I distinguish what is the world out there and what is the world in there. And what has happened in the new abnormal is the inner world has been completely, totally displaced and eradicated. It has been taken over. And people who are sitting alone in their four walls, watching TV or listening to the music, this is not contacting the inner world because it's involuntary, number one. It may have spillover to some beneficial side effects for a few people that can actually deal with the inner world in this critical way, in a critical sense. It's like to be totally at ease with an uncertainty of oneself. This is very important too, because uncertainty has been trashed. We want to have everything clear and certain, and markets have numbers, and it goes up, it goes down. It's like we function within knowing something to be for sure and for certain. Well, ultimately, our experience is fraught with uncertainty. We don't know. No matter what we do, there's always going to be a level of uncertainty, which has disconcerted and created havoc within a lot of people's brains and minds, and they go kind of nuts, if they're not nuts already, because of too many immunizations where the autism has set in, and the way of thinking has completely gone haywire. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people that are still normal or functioning within a level of normalcy that invokes reasonable and stuff that really works within us. Like, that's who I'm talking to. People that are still capable of looking at themselves and being able to distinguish what is outside and what is inside. And this is a very crucial difference, which has been obliterated. Like I say, in this process, this civilizing process, this uncivilizing process over many centuries and even millennia, this has been peripheralized, this inner work. Now, the people might say, well, you know, universities and study and reading a book and having access to all this material, what is being produced, even from the visual art side of things, where you have museums galore. Every corner has some kind of gallery or museum. It used to be in New York in the 50s, there might have been 20 galleries or 25 galleries. I'm talking about serious functioning galleries. Now it's 50,000 or close to it, or 15,000. It's absurd. It's nuts. It's crazy. It doesn't mean the art is any better than it was 60, 70, 80 years ago, because you have 50,000 galleries as opposed to 25. Okay, what am I I kind of get off on tangents. I could go on this one, but I want to keep focused on this concept of inner and outer, and what is it that I can do in order to counter the psychotic behavior that is going on, and we're always seduced into following what other people are following, which is because the herd mentality happens, because it's the inner outer world is indistinguishable to people. It's like when you follow the herd, it feels like, oh, you're doing what you're thinking you should doing, or you wear clothes that have ripped pants, and you say to yourself, it makes no sense to wear pants that have holes in them, because we've been brought up, it's like, if anything, cold air goes in. No, but it's a fashion. So you wear pants that are ripped all over the place, and you feel like really like an individual. You look around, and only, you know, within your immediate circle, you look around, you have 20 people around you, and 18 are wearing ripped pants. Yeah, you're a real individual. I'm just saying, I'm just using the example of fashion. Fashion is such a ridiculous, well, the way it's practiced in a sort of ubiquitous way. Fashion is so ridiculous. So why even, you know, people that wear suits and ties, it's like, you know, I've always said that the tie idea is basically a capitulation to, you know, the noose. And this is actually a ritual in certain organizations. They force you to put the noose on, and then when you leave, this is very, not literally, they do this, and then when you leave, you put on a tie. Like, what's the difference? The noose, the tie is the same thing. So we subjugate ourselves to ways of thinking without critically thinking about stuff. And this is the counter. This is what I'm saying. This is what I reiterate. This is what I say again. My understanding of a resolution, of a possibility of coming out of this without having to stand necessarily on barricades. And I wouldn't suggest or dissuade anyone from standing on barricades. Protest. If it comes from an inner conviction, I would say follow that inner conviction, whatever that might be. Follow your conscience. This is part of the idea of conscience. But it's in some ways, this is even higher than conscience, because the ability to contact that inner self includes conscience, but it goes far beyond that. It's a much larger realm of existence. And once this realm becomes, or once this is accessible to us, once I feel I'm accessing this inner part of myself that allows me to explore, that allows me to put forward for myself, put forward something that I hadn't considered before. This is where the magic and the beauty begins to happen. This is what I consider to be beautiful in art as well. It's not acceptable colors and sort of traditional ideas of beauty, the kind of Keats beauty thing. No, it's what I consider beautiful is when this element of self emerges and is practiced. And how does this affect the ongoing for, millennia. The psychosis we understand to be culture or civilization. How would my small, how would this one person sitting in the middle of nowhere practically with an idea, how could this affect anyone or anything else? Well, I have faith. I'll go a bit into woo-woo land here. I have faith that by, obviously, over this isn't just one person. I'm not sure how many people it would take to convince others to begin to follow this, I suppose, be inspired by in some way the path that someone who has verified within themselves this is the right path for them, for that to influence others. I believe this to be functioning. This is why civilization, so-called, or we haven't annihilated ourselves. We have not figured out a way, as we keep talking about the idea that we could blow ourselves up. Yes, I see. I don't really believe that to be true, but yes, we could create major suffering with the technology, which we are creating. The technology is creating major suffering, but I'm always on the side that I see the reason we've survived is because this element of inner satisfaction being sought. People seek still that inner satisfaction, not satisfying themselves with the world out there, but satisfying. People are still quite in tune and in touch, not enough, but quite in tune and in touch with this idea of an inner, a satisfaction that comes from within. And we can displace all the pressures that might come from outside and replace them with that. And this is what's necessary to counter what is going on. Just imagine that more and more people relying on their own conviction, relying on their own sense of self to direct the world out there. What would that be in a collective sense? More and more and more. There are always going to be people that want to follow, but I'm saying, and maybe this is the natural leader. The natural leader is someone who wants nothing to do with leadership because the satisfaction is with having resolved and understood something, come to a truth that emanates from oneself, rather than convincing anybody else of this. I don't want to convince you of anything. I'm just saying that I'm going through a process of understanding and a deeper understanding of myself, which I say, this is my faith, will have an effect on others. Now, through my work, if you see my work and you are also inspired by what you see, then I have succeeded, or I have at least touched something that is of value outside of myself even. This is fabulous. I think this is an enormous reward, a feeling that I have when a person looks at one of my paintings, when I do an exhibit, when I have a show, and I literally see a level of heartfelt appreciation. You don't have to be able to explain it, but it's there. Like people, I've experienced this. This is very satisfying to me. It's something that I'm sure people are motivated in the arts to continue to do what they do, even though the rewards appear to be so minimal. It's like most artists never have their work shown in their lifetime, hardly. I mean, in any meaningful way. I've been quite fortunate, actually. I've had quite a number of experiences exhibiting my work, and maybe not on the level of a museum of modern art, but museums have exhibited my work, and I've felt, have I felt greater for it? Well, the nice thing about museums is they have a budget, and they can do things that you wouldn't be able to do without having that kind of financial support, and to put something and get more people to come in and all that kind of stuff. But I've had just as much satisfaction from a person coming in the studio, a single person who is just completely buys into what it is that they're seeing. I mean, that's worth me spending, every day in the studio for whatever period of time I'm here. It's really worth it. That's how it works for me anyway. That's why I'm still doing it after almost 50 years. So the new abnormal is what I said in my last video, that it's people distancing themselves from themselves. And the idea of resolving, at least in a way that we feel we are making our contribution. Like I feel I'm making my contribution by making the best work I can in terms of a visual artist. And I don't care if people say, well, so what, nobody sees it, and you're just such a, my kid could do it. All this stuff falls by the wayside because we need to have this level of faith in ourselves, and I'll invoke this, each other, the way this is being abused, especially by our current prime minister here in Canada. He keeps invoking the each other. He's not the only one, but this is part of the new abnormal mantra to keep instilling this in people. What does it mean? We are doing this for each other. You know how it's truthful? Is that there is a group of people that includes our prime minister and the higher elites and the echelons. They're doing it for each other, all right, not for us, but for each other. The payoffs are just on the surface. The underlying bringing in, I shouldn't even say bringing in, the underlying continuation of something that has been established over centuries and millennia is now being ratcheted up to a level that it's never been ratcheted up before, except possibly when the whole world was at war. This is a world war. This COVID psychosis is a kind of world war, and it's a world war on life itself and the conscience and the inner world that is being pummeled and is going to be pummeled out of existence unless each individual finds a way, with whichever way that might be. I don't have a solution. I have certain practical applications for myself. But generally, if this is something that makes sense to you, just take this to the Akashic bank, to your soul bank, and say, I need to verify stuff in the highest possible sense within myself, not outside. It's like shut the world outside off completely and let something that has affected you, me, into a completely isolated, totally by myself kind of feeling. And it's all right. And if nothing comes out of it, it's still okay. To live with the uncertainty is part of being us, you, me. And living with the uncertainty is in fact part of the solution. That to be able to accept something without an outcome or a solution is part of the solution toward this psychosis, toward getting rid of this psychosis that's all around us. That's what I'm saying. I guess the best solutions are no solutions. I'm not proposing any solution. I'm not. It's like the swamis on the planet always sort of hide vaguely behind, oh, I'm not really saying anything, but do this. Oh, no, I'm not really, but do this. So I'm not going to fall into that trap because it's very personal. What I'm saying is very personal. And, you know, people, you look at people every day coming onto this platform, whatever, wearing the noose. The tie is the noose. It gives them away. They've never critically thought about wearing a tie. What is the tie? It's this. It's belonging to an organization that would have you as a slave. It's like, yeah, you're being dragged along by ritual and tradition. So don't do the noose. That's what I say. Don't do the noose. Anyway, I think I've said what I want to say today. And the new abnormal, don't buy, there is no such thing as a new normal. It's either normal or abnormal. So what we're facing is it's a new abnormal. Hope this helps a little bit. I just thought I'd sit down and ramble on a bit like I often do. And yeah, I'm back making paintings, and something is stirring. Something is stirring. Let it stir. Let it stir, let it bubble.